And we're live.
Yay!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the live stream.
He made up the title.
They. I go by they, them pronouns. My name is Dave, or Theory, and this is Theory Play. And I don't think anyone's in the chat yet anyway. But hi. Yeah, this is my brother, everybody. This is Steve. If you saw the awesome thumbnail, then you know that Steve is two things. A Bernie bro, because really into Bernie, and also my brother. So, and also a skeptic.
Not necessarily the world's best.
Hi, Callie.
Be skeptical of that claim.
Welcome. And so I don't know, when we have conversations, we generally kind of talk about politics, what we agree and disagree on, and it always comes back to critical thinking. And I think that's something we both value in a lot of ways for different reasons, but also some of the same reasons. And honestly, like this channel is philosophy and critical theory, but I would say that my emphasis recently has mostly been critical theory and continental philosophy, a lot less critical thinking, even though I do talk about critical thinking and I care about a lot of the tools, and I'm always like talking about fallacies that actually exist or ones that need to be coined. Like we were talking about a fallacy earlier that needs to be coined, like added to the list. There's a few, but yeah. So I've got a few questions, but let's start off with maybe you could just say a few things about yourself.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed our chats. It's kind of funny because if you go back to when we were little, I was 6 years older and he was the little guy, and I wanted him to look up to me, but he never did. And we kind of had a little bit of a difficult relationship.
I never looked up to anybody.
He was a rebel. It's true.
They were. This is gonna be hard. You're the first sibling I'm gonna try to break in on this, and it's only because we're on a live stream right now.
Yeah. As soon as we get live.
Yeah.
Haven't said anywhere.
I know.
I'm gonna try.
No, it's hard.
It's ironic because we had the most difficulty growing up, but now as adults, I get along better with him than anybody, and I love all my siblings. But like we agree on a lot, and we're the only ones that have like deep philosophical discussions. So I really appreciate our time together in our chats, and I probably appreciate your opinion more than anybody I talk to. So I like to test my ideas against your mind.
No, I find it really beneficial.
I think one of the foundational principles of critical thinking, which I've talked about before, is knowing when you're not an expert and deferring to the expert consensus. And I would not be conforming to my principles if I didn't respect the masters in philosophy. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I do think I have some expertise, and I kind of I've studied the issues from outside the academic field, and I think that gives a different perspective, which I hope is useful. But I have to respect the people who are formally studied it. So I like to hear what you think of things and my theories, and hopefully you agree with them. And sometimes you disagree, and I take that under serious advisement, and you've changed my positions on several things.
Yeah, and you've pissed me off a few times where I thought about it for like a couple months and then came to a more nuanced position, which is one of my favorite things about having conversations with other people. Like I don't. Is that TV? Is that TV playing right now? Can we get that? We're going to turn this off. Hold on. It was a little distracting. But one of the things Callie just said in the chat is that she, right, I believe, or they, Callie identifies as an atheist, but not usually, and is technically a skeptic, but doesn't identify as a skeptic because of the connotations that come with the word. That's what they just said. So that's actually a nice thing. I wanted to go into the relevancy of skepticism, logic, science, facts, reason, all of these things that were especially big buzzwords during the height of the new atheists that seem to get overshadowed by the rise of Gamergate, and then some of those people kind of going in the anti-SJW direction, and that kind of became its own little industry. So and that kind of gave it a bad connotation. I think that's probably what you're saying, right? They, them, yeah, definitely atheist.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thought because I had never even thought about the idea that skepticism could be considered not relevant until you brought it up. That's so outside my bubble. It's like, what do you mean?
Yeah, this is
Like-
my bubble. Well, you know, in our bubble, yeah, totally. But
It's like you're either saying one of two things. You think it doesn't actually matter to everyday life, or you think everybody is already skeptical and they've learned critical thinking.
right.
And neither one of those is close to true.
No, absolutely not.
So it's like, how could it not be relevant?
Well, and let's so Bernie Bros, skeptics, and rationality are three words that all have a bad rap. And we were arguing about some of the good reasons and bad reasons for why Bernie Bro has a bad rap. You know, I did a video on how I used to be a Bernie Bro. And
Which I watched. I thought it was good.
Thank you. And except for the mic quality, but in that,
I'm not much of a critic.
I had a bad lapel mic.
I'm a skeptic, not a critic.
Wow. Yeah. So the basic point in that one is just like I was basically defining it as people who don't care about representation at all, or say that it's an enemy to the cause, or who are like, oh, intersectionality, that's a bad word. You know, it has a bad aftertaste, which it could have a bad aftertaste if you run into the wrong people or whatever, and they were using that concept
Totally
poorly.
I can totally understand how, depending on your perspective and bubble and you know who you're hanging out with, you could run into repeatedly a group of people who are very passionate about Bernie, and you know if they're all happen to be guys and they kind of are passionate and kind of, when you're passionate, you want to talk over people. You know, that's kind of like this whole mansplaining thing. And then it can lead to this perception of the Bernie Bro. And I think that's true for any movement. Like
and then the bad reasons for why that was popularized was because there were opportunistic people in the establishment wings of the Democratic Party that were obviously, they saw that as an advantageous narrative to push.
I don't think it's a coincidence that Hillary in the 2008 campaign, that there happened to be this thing about Obama boys. It seems
I didn't even know about that.
highly
I didn't even
coincidental.
know about that. I didn't even remember it. I voted for Obama, but I didn't remember the Obama boys slur. So, but okay. So that was Bernie Bros. Okay, yeah. Rationality gains a sort of its own bad connotation because people rationalize things, and often they'll criticize and be skeptical of everything except their own most base assumptions, and sometimes those most base assumptions contain some prejudices they're not really willing to like analyze. So you think you're so critical, you think you're so rational, but a lot of the time you're rationalizing your biases. If you're actually implementing rationality, if you're actually implementing critical thinking, then maybe that would be less of a problem. But
right.
You know, we're human.
No, and somebody who is actually a skeptic and is actually studying critical thinking because they actually care about truth is going to be most skeptical of themselves. You have to be. That's the core of being a skeptic, because the way our biases work, we are biased toward what we already believe, and if what we already believe happens to be wrong, we will never change it unless we confront those biases head on.
Totally.
So absolutely, anybody who tackles an issue and is not looking at the other side seriously and trying to think, is it possible that I'm wrong? You're not going to find out if you are wrong, and then you'll stay wrong. So I have somebody coming by that I've forgotten about.
Do you suddenly remember?
Let me go outside.
Did you
take care of it? I'll be back in a minute or two.
All right. Yeah. So we'll come right back here. You're welcome, Squirrel Army, and welcome, Dorian Sapiens, and welcome, Anne, and welcome, River Ransom. Wow. It's all the regulars. It's all the regulars. Half the names that I knew by heart, and the other half names that I've become familiar enough with. You just heard puppies, yes, and actually, so while Steve's running around getting that stuff figured out, let me show everybody the puppies, because I would be remiss not to. Let's see if there's any back here. I hope I don't like lose signal because I'm running around the back. A puppy! Oh, there's. Oh my God. I can't really pet them right now because, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. This is, yeah. So I've been here in California staying with my brother for a few days, and he's got all these husky puppies, and they're so good.
So adorable. Yeah, we have the stud owners who are coming by. And I think they want to see the puppies.
Oh, come on back.
Okay, come on back.
I'll go back inside.
Check out the puppies.
Here. I'll go inside. Okay. Only one puppy came in with me.
Yeah.
I know, we didn't say that there would be puppies. In the description of the video, we forgot to say that there'd be puppies. That would have probably brought a lot more people than skepticism, even though both are just as relevant as ever.
How can puppies ever not be relevant? Right? Look at this. Look at that. She has eyeliner. See that? How many puppies do you see that wear makeup?
I'm going to put this back out. One more. All right, where were we?
That is my bad. Marilyn texted me that she was coming over like at 10 o'clock and she never came over. Then she shows up as soon as we start live streaming.
For anyone who Instagrams, make sure to check out Theory Playboy on Instagram because I have been doing some live streams that become stories on my Instagram of the puppies. Also, I can link my brother's channel. He's got puppers in the.
That's all I have right now.
Yeah, it's the channel only has puppies right now. Anyway, all right. So let's do a quick recap of where we just were. I'm gonna see if anyone said anything though. Kylie said, "I am glad to discover instances in which I've been wrong because I want to believe in the most things that are true and to not believe in the most things that are untrue/false."
That sounds like Matt Dillahunty. And it's absolutely, that the search for truth is exactly that. We strive to believe as many things that are true and as few things that are false. And in order to do that, you have to be your own biggest skeptic. So I try to, nobody's perfect, but you challenge me on something and I do try to think about it. So it's a good relationship.
Yeah. So we were talking about how before some of you came in the room, I think we were talking about how rationality, critical thinking, and Bernie Bros, three things I think of when I think of my brother, in various circles have gained their own rap because you get some people who are really good at science, maybe, or at least communicating about it, steering way out of their lane, talking about things, fumbling around, turns into a shit war or a flame war online. And then, we have, Thunderfoot, for instance, who we were talking about, just as one example of someone who's really good with science and communicating about it. But when it comes to social issues, it's like, I get the feeling that when it comes to science, like there are people who are taught science when they're younger and they're told this is hard science. And then they kind of have this impression that if there are softer sciences like political science or social science, then they can just fly by the seat of their pants because it's all subjective anyway. Who gives a shit? And then they think, well, all I need is my basic rules of logic. It's like, well, no, there's also things like thinking sociologically that have been developed that are important. So
right. No, I was a fan of Thunderfoot from way back, and he has a lot of great videos and content on religion and creationism and picking the low-hanging fruit, which is always entertaining. It might not be the most educational for a lot of
cherry picking the lowest hanging fruit. No, we were just watching the Sean cherry picking video earlier.
Totally.
That's
most of his videos are about religion and technology and debunking Kickstarter things and science. Like, it's really interesting, but he does have like 1 in 20 that's targeting low-hanging feminist fruit, like SJW stuff, and often cherry picking it unfairly. So that's really unfortunate. If he was actually as rational as he claims to be, he would be critical of himself and he would try to see what the broader picture is, and he'd have videos about that as well, at least at a minimum.
Well, and something that I hope to see in the next year to 2 years is you getting to have a real sit down conversation with Thunderfoot, which we'll get to your future goals in a little bit. But one of the things that the thumbnail says is that you're the best skeptic in the world.
Yes, your words.
I made it up. But look, I got some people to click here. So yeah, logic can't answer ethical and moral questions. Well, it can help somewhat, right?
So it's an important part of the process.
Yeah.
I think morality is based on core feelings at a fundamental level, but from there, how you formulate the rules and stuff definitely comes down to logic. And you can objectively measure the impacts of various rules toward a specific goal. So, for instance, the perception of morality that Sam Harris has kind of put out there, and that's pretty much universally accepted, is that we want to maximize well-being and minimize suffering, which some people have argued is an objective basis for morality, which certainly isn't. There still is off distinction. But once you agree with that subjective value, which everybody does, you can objectively measure how things impact that.
Or
at least
most
to some
people,
degree.
yeah. Most people who
degree.
would want to have a conversation would agree with that. Yeah.
Right.
There's a great video by Cuck Philosophy that critiques the moral landscape that we should review later. But like we should also, because you haven't seen it, probably bookmark that. But I just would be remiss not to mention Cuck Philosophy having done that. And I think if I remember right, a lot of what he's going after is like that Sam Harris thinks he's saying some things for the first time, and he seems to put it when really it's like basic things that philosophers have always agreed on that he thinks that he's kind of saying for the first time.
Totally.
And then on the other side, he oversimplifies to the point of complete dissolution of some very serious like conundrums that philosophers can't get out of. But
I respect Sam Harris. I think he's a good person. I think he's a good thinker. He certainly has blind spots, and pretty big ones. I think part of Sam Harris's problem, possibly, my understanding is he became famous kind of before he was ready to be. He posted a book that was just the right time in the world, like right after 9/11. And at the point, if I'm not mistaken, he didn't have any like actual degrees yet. He hadn't actually studied serious topics.
Oh, for real?
And he's been kind of playing catch up. He was working on his PhD for much of the period of time where he was actually famous already. And I think that is a distraction, and it can inflate the ego. And anyway, I don't want to get into all that, but definitely blind spots with him.
Yeah, Kali mentions something important. They say, I used to /sub to a lot of popular atheists. Then there was a shitstorm, and oops, these people are bigoted asshats who do refuse to accept my existence and the core of what makes me me.
Right.
Yeah. So there's definitely issues of marginal.
It's disappointing when people who portray themselves as critical thinkers, who you learn a lot of stuff from, then don't examine their own biases.
Yeah, and if you want to expand on that, either of you, since you both shared that experience, do feel free to expand on that. But I wanted to take it to we're going to talk. So we talked a little bit about the relevance still of these things, but we talked about it at the individual level. Let's talk about the relevance of critical thinking and religion, and being critical of religion or skeptical of religion in this day and age.
Sure.
People talk like
the important thing of
we're in a secular society already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would want to back up and like what is critical thinking to me? I think it's good to define our terms. So to me, when I say that, what I mean is what critical thinking is an intellectually honest search for truth. And when I say truth, I mean accurate knowledge about reality. So it all comes back to that. That's the foundation. And if that's not what you're doing, then I don't think that's critical thinking. It needs to be an intellectually honest search for truth.
And I feel like the word consistent is a really big factor here for you.
Yes.
And tell me how that factors in.
Well, one of the core laws of logic is the law of contradiction. And the only quibbles with the law of contradiction tend to be either semantic or in theoretical quantum physics. But in our common existence, it's a solid law of logic.
Hard and fast, yeah.
It's hard and fast, and consistency is the most important thing, I think. So people have asked me what like what my standard of evidence is when it comes to specific topics. And my position is I will take whatever standard of evidence you want to posit as long as you posit it consistently.
So how does that help you in a serious conversation with someone?
Well, if
like as a basic ground rule of the conversation, or as a rhetorical tactic, what is it?
It's both, because I think everybody appreciates the need for consistency. I mean, nobody wants to seem like a hypocrite. You can't claim one standard of evidence in this respect and then not take it in another respect.
So what's one of your favorite examples? Yeah.
Let's just a fairly simple one. So let's say, like, we were just talking about Kent Hovind and one of his debates. He's a young Earth creationist.
Hands up if you're familiar with.
We grew up with him. We watched his videos as part of our science class.
He's a young Earth creationist.
Yes.
Likes to debate.
So when it comes to consistency, something I think is hilarious is that even though he has the anti-science position of young Earth creationist, and he has that position because of his literal interpretation of the Bible, and it has nothing to do with science. And yet, when it comes to flat Earth, now he has the scientific explanation that defies the literal explanation of the Bible. He's not being consistent here.
Yeah, yeah. And if you could get him on that,
I think people have tried before, but they didn't push it enough.
No, and that's one of the things that I've really appreciated about like your critiques of how other people go into these debates with some of these people. I think that you'd be able to. So one of the things that Steve has done, and we should have already set this up. Steve has developed some of the best takedown arguments. And not when I say takedown, it's not like owned, it's not, because that's actually one of the annoying things about like meme culture and rationality is like destroyed by facts and logic. But at the same time, like exactly. you don't, because those are done for like pow. Now the person who watches it, who agrees, feels intellectually superior. No, doing it in a way where it's a call for conscience or intellectual honesty to make you go, shit, maybe I am wrong. How can you present an argument in the way that cuts to the core of where the other person is coming from, where they genuinely reassess and then maybe like readjust and stop being such bigots, for instance?
I was a devout evangelical conservative Christian for 20 years. So when I actually converted, I was probably around 8. And I memorized scripture. I read the Bible cover to cover 5 times. I memorized 12 complete chapters, in addition to hundreds of others for Awana and stuff like that. Listen to thousands of hours of sermons and Christian radio, not just like bored, but like devout, like listening, like focused. I was bought in every way you can be, and I was absolutely confident I was right. And it was conversation that brought me out of that in a large degree. Part of it was my own education. I'd studied a couple things out of it. I studied the mind a little bit because I was curious about changing habits. And I also was reading about like statistics and stuff because I was trying to learn how to play blackjack. And those two things, in addition to online conversation, led me out of that. And I think it gave me a good lens through which to view it. So I kind of know how other people think from both sides. And it also made me more cautious of my own beliefs because everything I believed was wrong. So it's like, maybe I'm wrong still.
I share this eye-opening experience.
Right.
For me, it was a definite process. I'm assuming it was a process for you as well. So like, let's get into.
Well, my perception of it, I mean, it happened. Like, I feel like it brings me, because I come from a background of the Bible, and so I often think of parables in a different context now. So there's this parable of.
What is a parable for the person?
A parable is a story that Jesus tells usually, and or it's like a story that has some kind of moral meaning or something.
Yeah, like the prodigal son, or
right.
Yeah.
So he tells several stories about how faith is like a mustard seed,
right?
Basically, and if it falls on fertile ground, it can grow. If it falls on stony ground, it'll wither and die. And the interesting thing is it's also true about doubt. So if you can crack the shell of certainty people defend their worldview with, if you can just little crack, and a little water, a little doubt gets in there, and it starts ruminating. That eventually can like split apart and shatter the whole worldview. So my goal is to make arguments that are so simple and powerful that even when people are trying not to understand it, because willful ignorance is a thing, they can't help but have that chipping away at their certainty.
Right, which is like the opposite of my own platform, where it's like I'm trying to take some really difficult stuff and make it easier to access, but you have to really want to understand it to still get it.
Right.
And you're developing things that are like truth bombs, like little grenades.
Basically.
A parable is an allegory for itself. A takedown is just taking down terrible arguments. It doesn't have to anything to do with destroying anything. True. We got some people in here sympathetic. Oh wait, but that was a response to what Kali said. I don't want to destroy anyone. I want to learn from a nuanced and in-depth conversation discussion of our.
Kali said, "I'm happy to change my mind when presented with enough evidence," and that is, yeah, exactly. That's the core of critical thinking. You're not actually a skeptic if that's not your core position. Absolutely.
So the process for your own the doubt, where did it come from? What was the big epiphany in your process?
Well, a lot of what led to my eventual deconversion, I learned in sermons, which is ironic, because Christians talk a lot about truth, and God is the God of truth, and truth matters. And I always believed that truth matters, and I always told myself that if I was wrong, I would want to know. I remember telling myself that when I was 12, so it took me another 16 years to actually get to a position where I could see that I was wrong. But the core principle was there most of my life, that truth matters, and if I am wrong, I want to know. That is a principle of intellectual honesty that I look for people who have a serious conversation with. The other thing we should say is it was conversation kind of brought me out of that world, and that conversation has become my like single hobby. All I've done for the last decade basically is debating people online and discussing, and it's how I educated myself, because I seek the most intelligent people I can to discuss things with, especially if they disagree with me.
Right.
And so I've had online discussions with numerous people, some of whom are actually known, and some of which have actual degrees, and some of which are just random morons. It teaches you a lot about rhetoric, kind of in the trenches.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good skill to have.
Yeah, and it got to the point where Steve had approached every question or every like. Do you want to explain really quick what apologetics is before I get into that?
Well, it's
just for people who don't know what apologetics is.
It's the opposite of intellectual honesty in the first place.
And it's the opposite of philosophy.
It's the opposite of critical thinking, because we just said that you need to be willing to admit if you're wrong. The core of apologetics is, this is my belief. This is how we defend our belief. It's all focused toward validating the conclusion, not looking for what if my conclusion is wrong.
Right.
So that's what it is, but it typically relates to religious apologetics is how most people use it. So it's there's Christian apologetics, and there's Muslim apologetics, and even a few Hindu apologetics, although you don't see them as often in my fields of thought. And it really doesn't matter, because the same criticisms relate to any of them. And I think it's really easy to make the point that if you value truth, and you value the law of non-contradiction, then you must respect the burden of proof. I think the burden of proof is logically necessary. And that is all you need to defeat religious claims.
Right.
Because if you make a claim and you don't present justification for it, you're done.
Yeah.
And they do present justification, but when you analyze the justification, it's not actually justification.
It doesn't hold any water.
It doesn't hold water. So that's really all it takes to get to that position. And the reason the burden of proof is logically necessary is because again, it goes back to the law of contradiction. Because if you're not skeptical when it comes to all claims and beliefs, then you're going to accept contradicting positions, and now you're in a state of contradiction.
So we have different parts of the brain that take on different types of processes for processing different types of information. It can be interpreted in different ways, and it seems like that somehow leads to people holding all sorts of conflicting information that they have to sort through. So on the one hand, the burden of proof is useful for cutting through a lot of the BS there and simplifying. But like, what are the other benefits for psychological well-being, personal fulfillment, life development?
Totally.
The UC comes from either fighting off magical thinking or
Can you guys hear that? My dog is scratching at the door, so if that's an annoyance, I'm sorry.
They have the option of going outside and running around, but they are in a room that has a doggy door, and then they want to join.
They hear talking. They're social. They want to come in and hang out with us. So I understand. Anyway, so I think the most important thing about critical thinking is how it relates to our everyday personal lives. So I've kind of reduced problem solving to a pretty simple formula, which is, and this is probably not unique to me. I was unique to my thinking, but it's anyway. It's define the problem, find the solution, implement the solution. Pretty simple. But critical thinking is all about the number 2 there, finding the solution, and that's any problem in your life. If you have relationship problems, you're having problems losing weight, you have health problems, you want to get promoted at work, you need to find a job. Any kind of problem you have in life, you need to find the best solution for that problem. And if you ask 10 people, you're going to get 10 different opinions.
Right.
So critical thinking is how you weigh which one of those is best before you try to implement it. And it will save you tremendous amounts of time and lead to greater success in all your goals by doing that. So that's why I can't, like, it was a total like mind blow to be like, why would skepticism possibly not be relevant?
Right. Well, and I think that the answer for it is really, it ties back to one of the points raised a little bit ago. Haven't really kept up, y'all. But it'd be nice if more people could abide by the minimize harm, maximize well-being meme when people of color, LGBTQ plus people, etc. are involved. And I was going to say that this is, if you're, and actually, I identify this way with my video. I don't know if it's still listed or not. Patrons at least have access to it, but it's called Half Pilled, and it's one of my Peterson videos at the beginning of the year. And I say that.
I'm sorry, I was rolling my eyes at the thought of red pill, but you said half pill.
Yeah,
I wasn't rolling my eyes at him.
Peterson was big for like a short period of my life when I was what I call half pilled, which is. I had a baseline skepticism because I have an orientation towards philosophy. I did not have strong political attachments except for like in a couple of areas. And everything else I just haven't researched enough yet. So it's just kind of like that skepticism position. But because of the way the anti-SJW industry had kind of arose without me really being aware of it, and then kind of slowly becoming like inculcated by it, that skeptical position left me like, oh, I'm the centrist. I'm just most skeptical of these people right now, which, well, there's all sorts of stuff that falls under that. Like, and that's where you end up being like, yeah, I care about everybody's rights and I care about, but you're sitting here like, but does this really matter? Does this thing really matter as much as this thing? And then you start second guessing other people's experiences and things that matter a lot. Right. Especially if you're in a particularly marginalized position, like a lot of the people who are trans or non-binary, or myself, non-binary and genderqueer, who are in this chat. So do you want to talk about that as talking about minimize harm, maximizing well-being? What's your approach to that so far? Yeah. Oh, Callie, you go to Breadcast if you want. We're going to be doing this for another 20 minutes.
Cool. So
you're a socialist.
Yes.
Or
I mean,
I actually let's, before we say that, talk about why you don't like isms.
Yeah, great minds think alike, especially when they're brothers.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, man, when you first started this, I wanted to. You said something. I wanted to bring up labels. So I'm trying to avoid labels as much as I can.
Yeah.
Because I think, and there's certainly a benefit to them in some restricted fields of thought, but in the broader rhetorical sense, anytime you use a label, it checks a box and it allows people who are thinking lazily to just kind of put you in the box and shoo you off. I've seen this a lot when I portrayed myself as an atheist. People are like, oh, you're an atheist. And then they start arguing against stuff you didn't even say. And you're like, I didn't say that. Why are you talking about that? And it's because you said this, thus you must be all of this. And so there's a massive rhetorical benefit, I think. And it's much more educational to, instead of saying a label, you state your position conceptually as succinctly as possible.
Yeah. So
if somebody asked me my religion, I might say, I don't believe in any claims that I haven't seen good justification for. I don't believe in God because I haven't seen any reason to.
Mm-hmm.
That invites discussion. Whereas if you said you're an atheist, so they might just put you in that box and not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I personally, I love talking about this. My wife gives me a lot of grief because there's been a couple instances where somebody knocked on the door, Jehovah's Witness or Mormon or something, and I had them stuck on my porch for 3 hours. So I love talking about it. And my feel is, if you're going to knock on people's door, you have a burden of proof, and you should not just turn around and leave and go talk to the next person without confronting your burden of proof.
Come back here. What's your address? I'm going to come to your house.
I wasn't harassing, but I did try to, I kept them involved. And it's like, no, wait, you came here, you knocked on my door, so tell me why I should believe this.
Well, and, apologetics is really scary to me. It's terrifying to think that you can be raised in a household where they tell you that you should use magical thinking, where you've got, the sky god who cares what, body parts you touch on yourself, and it will hold it against you, and all of these things, who's going to follow you around, and you can communicate with telepathically. The dynamics that are dangerous there, I feel like I grew up in various elements of that I don't like it. I got problems with it, but
totally.
I forgot where I was going to go with that.
Well, getting into the magical thinking, that's actually, once you accept those core premises in a fundamental way that you don't question because you were raised with them, it can lead to all kinds of stuff. So we were just talking about this earlier, that I was raised in a belief in prayer, that I could think, within my own mind, not verbally, and God heard it. Now that's telepathy. And so I believed in telepathy to some extent. I didn't, obviously you don't usually do it with other people, but it could be possible, right?
Seems pretty reasonable.
So yes, I basically had an imaginary friend
for God will
a year when I was about 11, because there's this girl at church, and we started talking telepathically. Or at least I thought we were. So it was very, so I understand what the most powerful, the real reason a lot of people are so passionate about their religion. They'll give all these apologetics. The main one is the argument from spiritual experience. And I have a personal connection to that because I've seen both sides of it. You can have an incredibly impactful personal mental experience that is not what you think it is, basically. The experience is real. Your interpretation, maybe not so much.
Right. Yeah, I had a couple powerful answers to prayer when I was young, but looking back, it was definitely cherry picking and confirmation bias at work, because the 2 times when I found the thing I was looking for and praying so desperately for, there was 100 other times when I didn't find the thing, right? So
right. Of course.
But when you do find it, it's so big, and you're just like, wow, this proves.
No, one of the reasons I had that delusion for so long was because I think it was just a couple weeks into imagining that I could talk to her. I told her telepathically to meet me at the front door of the church. And so I went there, and she literally knocked me over coming through the door. She was running and playing tag or something. So I was like, whoa. And I told myself that she didn't want to talk because, her dad said not to or something. And it was a whole thing.
Yeah.
So I had that relationship. I realized it wasn't true when I actually hung out with her finally, because it was like, wait a second, you don't know me. Unfortunately, I figured that out before I said something, because I would have never have that down. But anyway, now I'm telling everybody, so it's even irrelevant.
Whoa.
But I also had a relationship with another imaginary friend until I was 28, and that was Jesus. And
so you're 28. I didn't know. I didn't know what point that changed.
Yeah, it was towards the end of my period of unemployment during the big recession. So I think early 2011, this stuff was all kind of clicking into place, and was probably clicking into place still into 2012.
I felt like things were probably clicking. So they started clicking for you mid-20s because I remember you started doing some of your own theology, because basically like what you had been given wasn't going to be enough. For instance, I think, weren't you kind of left young earth creationism before you left Christianity, for instance, right? And speaking of relevancy, I really wanted to bring this up earlier, because one of the reasons that this still matters, and we have to think of ways to have conversations about creationism and all of these things, and is because our country is so ass backwards still. And we forget that it's run by evangelical conservative white men a lot of the time, right?
I think
it's easy to forget about that.
Realizing this week, because these abortion bans are like taking over the whole social space everywhere.
It's kind of a painful reminder.
On both sides. It's like, yeah, we're going back in the dark ages. So if you think skepticism isn't relevant anymore, I suspect you look around.
So we have to find new ways of communicating.
There's a lot of
these
states
ideas
that are literally teaching creationism, and that the Earth is 6,000 years, and that the Loch Ness Monster is proof of creationism.
Yes.
With tax dollars. So that's the problem. And even in the more liberal states like California, I forget which poll it was. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been a Gallup poll, but it was some study that showed that about 70% of people are not taught evolution very well, because teachers either don't teach it, or they don't teach it well, because it's considered controversial. And the Christians have been really good at brainwashing their children to raise their hand and say, "Were you there?" And it derails the whole topic, and then they don't get taught very well.
Right. Yeah, and the same thing obviously for climate change, the same thing obviously for sex ed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, anyway. That's why I'm such a big fan of what you're trying to do with developing new approaches that don't just preach to the choir.
Right.
Because there's a demographic there for speaking to the choir.
My whole goal is absolutely to talk to people who are not in the choir and try to convert them, because we're not going to make major social changes without reaching across and trying to get those people in.
So do you think, because it sounds like you think that conversion, you get them to kind of gravitate away from, the magical thinking, right? Like, or at least into critical thinking. Like, how would you parse that out? You think that would create lots of positive social change if people moved away from
definitely
religious thinking?
It certainly definitely can. I mean, it's not a cure-all in itself. So like I said, well, did I say it? I don't remember. But anyway, so we were talking about values earlier and their order. And I think the most important value to start with is maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering from behind the veil of ignorance. That's where we start. But how you get to that goal is through the search for truth, because more accurate knowledge of reality leads to a higher probability of achieving your goals. So if your goal is to maximize well-being, you can achieve that goal.
Either as an individual.
Now, if your goal is to maximize the supremacy of the white people, that also helps that goal. The goal is the methodology is amoral. So I'm not going to say that critical thinking alone solves it, because some people use it to study psychology in such a way so they can sell their BS better.
True.
There's definitely negative uses of it.
Yeah, well, philosophy's obvious. Yeah, the same way. Like Richard Spencer, the alt-right guy.
Yeah, they think about rhetoric a lot and messaging, and and they intentionally portray themselves certain ways, and they do protest certain places to generate the reactions they want.
And they still read Gromsky
for their video clips and all that kind of crap. So yeah, we need to do a better job of attracting their base. There's a lot of people who care about truth, I think, and they care about their own well-being, and they might think, because they haven't really considered it, that they're on the right side. I was going to say the important, like, trying to change people's worldview thinking is an incredibly difficult thing. And I've learned a lot of rhetoric, and I've honed my arguments by doing this online discussion thing on like Quora and Facebook, stuff like this. And it's been incredibly beneficial to me. I can't say I've changed a whole lot of minds with it, because that's not how that works.
Yeah.
It's difficult to reason people into a position or out of a position they didn't reason into.
Yeah, I think
it can happen, and I think I've chipped away at some people's shells of certainty, but that's not the most powerful way to change worldview thinking. In my opinion, and I don't think we've talked about this, so it's actually a good topic. In my opinion, the best way to change worldview thinking is by inducting people basically into a tribe, because people change your thinking based on the people that are around them that are important to them. Yeah. It's not by online yelling at each other.
But I feel like this was, I think you might have attributed that insight to me when we were talking like a couple days ago, because I think I'd sent you an article and I'd kind of disagreed with you on some things. This was like a phone conversation a couple years ago, probably, where I was like, no, like the thing is like, we can't just go back to, we can't just go to bat with people on an individual argument by argument basis, because for most people at a deep psychological and emotional level, a worldview doesn't hinge on any one argument. A worldview hinges on a web of associations. And a lot of time, statements of belief are really statements of who you are with, right?
Right.
Like, and if you can lose a couple and you'd still be able to hang with the family or the friends, but there's a point after which it's like they won't put up with me anymore. I'm gonna have to find some new people.
Right. And there are people who are especially analytical and often are fairly high on the autism spectrum.
True.
I've noticed that amongst a lot of my most atheist and skeptical friends is a common thread that they seem to rank higher on the autism spectrum, whether they consider themselves autistic or not. And that is something different. And for these kind of people, if you have this ordered, logical thinking that's like well balanced, you can actually change your mind with just pure logic on certain issues, at least.
Right.
But
and actually, with a person like that,
work.
actually, the rhetoric, the aesthetic, the presentation, it actually can interfere. Right. They just give me the noble. I want it step by step. Give me a logic tree.
But for most people, they're part of a tribe, and they care more about their social contacts than anybody else. So I think ultimately the way we're going to change the most minds is by being more friendly with them and having a reason for them to hang out with us, for one thing. So I would like to eventually start having hangouts and stuff that aren't explicit, like they're not liberal, they're not atheists. It's just people getting together to maximize their well-being. And that's something everybody wants.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, and if you're doing that in practical, pragmatic ways, to where they actually are increasing their standard of living by being part of this group, then they want to be part of the group. And now your thinking is going to start rubbing off on them kind of organically. And I think that's ultimately the way more change is going to happen than just laying out ordered critical thinking. But as part of that type of group, I think hopefully there would be enough education to where people are picking up critical thinking, because that is relevant to our personal life. So like, to get back, there's so many areas. Like, you think about advertising and buying stuff. Anytime you buy something, that's a decision that should probably be influenced through some critical thought, because you have to be skeptical, obviously, of all the advertising you're seeing and all the marketing. And it's like,
adversaries,
is this the right choice? And I think partially because of my critical thinking background, the position I currently hold is very dependent on critical thinking because I'm influencing decisions regarding a $100,000 monthly marketing budget. And there's a lot of people who want to take part of that budget. There's a lot of people marketing to me, and I have to spend it, but I have to be careful in how I spend it so I get the most benefit from it.
Totally.
But that's something everybody does at a smaller level. Everybody has money they spend, and you have to decide what the best way to do it is. So that's, again, comes back to the critical thinking and understanding your own biases, understanding other people's biases, understanding fallacies. One of my favorite things is hashtag what is your argument? Because a lot of people say things as if it's an argument, and there's not really an argument there.
Yeah.
So sometimes I have to like ask people and like try to construct it into like a more syllogistic manner. It's like, it sounds to me like you're saying this leads to this premise, which leads to this conclusion. But I mean, obviously that doesn't make sense. So correct me if I'm wrong. Like, and when you try to construct an argument, like a logical argument out of what they were acting like is an argument, that often falls apart right there.
So Steve has a lot of useful approaches for all of these kinds of things, and some awesome like truth bombs, slow to detonate, maybe perhaps depending on the person's constitution. But yeah, you'll eventually, hopefully soon, have your own channel for that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And we'll have hundreds of videos. You've got hundreds of pages of stuff already that we could run with. But I was thinking one of my favorite ones before engaging in a conversation. If you all have seen the Innuendo Studios alt-right playbook videos, which I know you've seen all of, but it's like that playlist is a classic on BreadTube especially. One of the real issues is having conversations with people where they're kind of like doing like this thing where they keep moving their position, and they end up contradicting themselves a lot, but they're moving from thing to thing to thing that you can't ever really get back to that. And you have a tactic for approaching conversations where I think it does something to impede that process.
Well, yes. So what my number one complaint with liberals in their discussions with alt-right and conservatives generally is because liberals tend to, as a group, care more about truth. Anytime somebody floats out something that's obviously not true, we want to chase it. So if
liberals cared about truth, they'd be anti-capitalist. But let's keep going. I'm just kidding. Well, I'm not.
True.
But
true. But it's a tendency. We want to think that we're right. We want to correct things that are wrong. And so what happens is anytime somebody in the right is like up against the wall in regards to an argument they've put up, all they have to do is say something that's clearly wrong, and it's this perfect little red herring that we can't help but chase. It's like the perfect lure. It's like, oh, I gotta chase that shiny. And I see these conversations all the time. They're going all over the place and never making any progress. If we don't stay on one topic, you're not going to do that. So I try to always, I'm glad to discuss this, but are you conceding the previous argument? Because we can't move on. If we care about truth, we should be trying to determine this. And this is something I say often. It's because if you agree with the law of contradiction and you value truth, and you and I have a contradicting opinion, I feel bound to continue discussing that contradiction until we figure out who's wrong. Because by doing that, we can, as a consensus, move closer to truth. Whether I'm wrong or you're wrong, we're going to move closer to truth. And if you say you value truth and you agree with the law of non-contradiction, then we shouldn't be jumping around all over the place. Let's talk about this first thing we started talking about that we have contradicting opinions about. And by doing that, the hope is that you can get to a place where they'll agree that that argument is bad. Now let's move on to this one that I know is much better. And that's progress.
You just made me think of another kind of established sort of ground rule going in on these kinds of conversations that I like that Destiny uses. Isn't it? I think it's him, right? Where he says like, if I gish gallop you, you let me know. And I will, and I will like.
Oh, it's really good. Destiny is another person
so let's
who's really good at debating and discussing people. Not debating because he doesn't do formal debates, but discussions. Yeah. And Matt Delahanty too. People who do it a lot are naturally better at it. It's amazing. It's a skill. It's like exercise. You get the exercise and you get better at it. But no, I would definitely agree. Anytime I'm talking to somebody I disagree with, especially live, I would make that a starting rule, because if you care about truth, yes, that's true. You should not keep talking. So basically what he says is, if I say something that you disagree with, just interrupt me. I don't care. It's not rude. Just interrupt me. Stop me. I don't want to keep going with a bunch of premises if you disagree with this one, because we got to discuss that first.
So, and the definition of gish galloping for anyone new to that is just basically that their statements are so loaded with things that if you spent all your time chasing down all of the things that actually, I'm not very good at explaining gish galloping.
Well, yeah, it comes from a creationist, Dwayne Gish, actually.
Oh yeah,
is awesome,
named after an actual debater
who used it, and like all of the creationists do, all of the apologetics do. It's basically all conservatives and religious apologetics use it because it's their best tool. If you're the simple position, then that gives you an advantage in a formal time debate where you have equal time, because you can just throw out a ton of garbage and the other person does not have time to handle it all. So if I make 50 points in my 10 minutes, and it's like the moon is getting farther away from the earth, so the earth can't be 4 billion years old, and the Grand Canyon proves the earth is young because the water like tore it out or something, and the flood says that there should be rock layers full of dead things, and they are. And you just make all these ridiculous points, and I don't have time to cover them all. I've already lost. So that's why it's so hard to discuss these people, debate these people honestly.
So taking it back to what Destiny says at the beginning, my favorite thing about that also is that saying, hey, cut me off if I'm doing this. He just gave himself permission to cut them off when they do it, because the thing is, they're the ones who are going to do it.
Exactly. They are.
And now that we brought up the Grand Canyon and young earth creationism, and I did make a video about being raised in a cult like a month and a half ago. And so therefore I probably actually have some ATI survivors subscribed to my channel at this point. And they very well might see this. And let's just say that they were recently defecting from that upbringing.
Yes.
Right. Recently defecting from a hardcore patriarchal brainwashing homeschool cult. And if that's the case, what's a truth bomb that you drop on them about young earth creationism? You just mentioned the Grand Canyon. And this was actually like, there are like longer many-step arguments or examples that requires more scientific knowledge, but you get bogged down in the debate because that takes a lot of time. You've got one that's just, it's just,
and that's exactly
and I can screen share. I can show it too.
No, that's fine. It's not like waiting for that.
Oh.
But exactly.
I meant the picture of the rock formation.
Oh yeah, we could totally Google some.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Google image search.
Yeah.
But basically, we need to be simple enough in our discussion that I'm trying to, like, how would I prove the Earth is young to a third grader who doesn't have any reason to believe scientists? Like, radiometric dating is too freaking complicated. It comes down to faith for most people. Do I believe the scientists? Now, I'm glad to make the argument that we should accept the expert consensus, because that's true, but that's a rabbit trail and it's more complicated. What I'd like to talk about the Grand Canyon, because I think it's their biggest blind spot and it's their biggest weakness, because anybody who looks at the Grand Canyon without any training outside of that, with like just a blank slate, they're going to be like, wow, that looks really old. And it does. So they know that's a problem. Am I supposed to be Googling something?
Yeah, if you bring up the image, and then I'll set up the screen share.
Oh, gotcha. So they have all these lines of apologetics about how the Grand Canyon can be explained by a young Earth. The problem is it can't. And if you, with just the slightest analysis, it's easy to demonstrate that.
This one like blew my mind when I learned it, because I didn't science for us was young Earth creationism in that household.
So let's wait on the share, but just to set the stage on that,
I just want to say one thing, and that's that River Ransom, I have not forgotten your question, and we're definitely going to talk about it. But anyway.
Just to give people a frame of reference who don't know young Earth arguments, they say that either the Grand Canyon was carved out over millions of years with a little bit of water, or maybe it was carved out by a lot of water in a short period of time. So it's like they believe in a global flood, and the global flood laid down all these strata at the same time. And then as the waters ran off, it did all this massive erosion in a small amount of time. Okay, so thinking of that, let's show the screen.
All right.
We're imagining in the last year, all these hundreds or thousands of feet of strata were laid down by the flood. And now the water's running off in this massive torrent, and it's just ripping out this canyon. Just
wait, are we there? Is it, hey y'all, can you see? Are we, oh yeah, we're there. Okay, here we go.
Well, wait a second. One of the most interesting thing about the Grand Canyon is all these giant pillars. And wouldn't the rush of water kind of knock those pillars over? If you're first off, in order for this lots of water to tear out the canyon, the sediment has to be fairly soft. Secondly, that's a good picture because if you try to argue the pillar is made out of stronger stuff, you can see the strata is the same as the cliffs around it. It's the same material. So how would this massive sideways force of all this water not crumble a pillar made out of basically mud?
Yeah.
It's just doesn't work.
The one that you showed me back whenever that was a long time ago, we're not screen sharing anymore.
Okay.
But the one that you were showing me was it's like an arch, and it's a really freaking skinny arch. And I remember just being like, holy shit, that's spot on. If this was like the worldwide flood carving that valley out, would have just knocked that right over. It wouldn't. Yeah,
absolutely. And the other thing, there's also an argument just from the weight of the sediment. So if you look at even the cliffs, you have like 1,000-foot high cliff that is basically vertical. And if that was any softer than it currently is, it would slump. The weight would like cause it to collapse. Because there are landslides every year in the Grand Canyon. Parts of it collapse every year because the weight becomes too much and it's weakened or whatever. So if it's any softer, it's pretty clear it would just completely slump down. So if it was ever softer while it was being formed, it wouldn't be that shape.
Right.
And if it was the same hardness, you don't have enough water to carve it out. So I've done the math, and it's very interesting. Let's see if I can remember it. So basically, and this is according to Answers in Genesis, their statistics, they say that there's 1,000 cubic miles of material that's eroded out of the Grand Canyon, but there's 100,000 cubic miles that's eroded from the whole like plateau, the whole area. So 100,000 cubic miles of material has eroded out of there. Okay. So how much water does it take to move that amount of material? Now it had to move the material 1,000 miles. Rock and sand is heavier than water. So water's like pushing over and it's kind of like rolling behind for 1,000 miles. So even let's say you just do 1,000 to 1, which is incredibly conservative. It's probably millions to 1, right? But 1,000 to 1, that would be a million. That would be 10 million. That would be 100 million cubic miles of water. You know how much water is on planet Earth? 330 cubic miles. So you're telling me 1/3 of all the water on Earth went through the Grand Canyon at once? How did that happen? Like, was it just stacked up for no reason? Like, it doesn't work like that.
We were also talking about, like, when I was like a young earther, like when I was like, while I was living the unexamined life, right? And I just wasn't really thinking very consciously about these things. Or when I was younger, and I was like, within the household and didn't have an outside perspective. I never thought about the fact that, like, I never really thought about what it would mean for the mountains to spring up in such a short period of time. Like what that would look like. Because like the idea of the young earther is that the earth was basically like this pretty round, wholesome, untarnished globe. and then busted up like
So
crazy in
basically-
a really short period of time.
They think the Earth was inflated a little bit because there's so much water under the crust
Yeah.
or within the crust.
Yeah.
And then the Bible says the fountains of the great deep sprung forth. So the water shot up and it kind of shrunk a little bit like a raisin. And so these ridges popped up.
Yeah.
And I'll get into other problems with that. But they also believe that that's when the plates broke up, because there's pretty clear evidence that a lot of the plates, the continental plates, used to be together in one continent. So they usually agree with that. They just say that they broke up during the flood.
Yeah.
So now we have, within a 1 year period or shortly thereafter, you have whole continental plates moving 1,000 miles and more. I mean, you think about the fact you have an earthquake that moves like a few inches or a few feet, and you have tsunamis that are wiping out coastal places.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So-
Okay. The volcanoes and the ash too. Like Yeah.
I was getting back
Okay,
to that,
okay.
but like the plates moving would cause tsunamis to such an extent you would probably have water like hurtling out of our atmosphere.
well, that's where it all went.
I know, right?
That's where it all went.
Like the ark would just go.
That's why it's on Mars. We fucking splashed. We splashed Mars. Sorry, I'm now I'm helping them rationalize. Okay.
No, anyway, no, but there's an interesting thing you can Google, and anybody can Google. It's pretty non-controversial because it's pretty easy to test. Called the geothermal gradient, which means you can predict pretty accurately the temperature of the Earth depending on how deep you go. And I don't know the math off the top of my head, but it does not take very long to get to overboiling. It's like a couple miles or something. So if you're below that point,
I usually stop shoveling after about a mile.
I know, right? So if the water was coming from that deep, it would not be water, it would be steam. So you're steam bathing the whole planet with steam, and that would probably kill you even in an ark. First off, it would definitely kill everything in the water. And secondly, all the volcanoes on Earth are going off because they have to, because we have clear evidence of volcanoes that have gone off in history. Over 4.5 billion years, not a big problem. Trying to get all those volcanoes off in 6,000 years, big problem. So all these volcanoes are going off at the same time, which is leading to the biggest volcanic winter of all time because the ash is blocking off the sun. While at the same time, the ocean temperature is much higher, and we have all the steam and humidity, which of course, since it's now colder, the air temperature is colder, it's all snow, and you end up with not just an ice age, it's ice cube Earth for decades.
Rock fucking solid.
So you have animals that are technically already extinct because there's only 2 of them, and that is not enough to perpetuate a species. And they're getting out of the ark and onto snow and frozen mud because the plants are all washed away. It's just frozen mud and ice on top for decades. And I don't think they would survive. But the biggest problem with
My biggest problem with that story is it's the largest scale genocide in the history of ever, and it's enacted by God.
well, yeah, the interesting thing is the more reasonable Christians will say it's not literally true, it's just a metaphor. Like, you think that's a beneficial metaphor?
Yeah.
Like,
I love metaphors, but that one is not
So,
very good. Yeah.
the perfect creator messed up. Like, he literally admits he messed up and decides to just start over. But instead of just snapping his finger and like doing it with magic, he does this whole complicated global flood thing,
Yeah.
which could not possibly happen without having clear geological evidence that it doesn't exist. There would be one very clear flood layer all over the Earth, and there isn't. So,
yeah, so it's interesting that for me, it was actually the moral implications of the flood story that really drove me out of that level of fundamentalism in the first place, because it was like, and I hadn't heard it put in such blunt terms, but now it's more popular. But it's like, the Bible is supposedly the basis of morality. There is no prohibition or complete and outright banning of slavery, genocide, or what was the other one? Is it rape?
So the way I put it is the Bible explicitly endorses owning, beating, and raping other human beings as slaves. And it explicitly commands genocide.
Yeah,
And you're going to call that the foundation of morality? I think I have a better foundation for morality than you do.
yeah.
And they criticize atheists saying, how do you possibly have morality? You can't have any foundation for it. Really?
You're managing somehow. Yeah, and then there's the obvious rebut from the Christian who's like, well, but this is the new law. Jesus brings the new law into effect. But okay, first of all, so there was logical consistency. You believe in the God who was for that, and
the God who changes not.
The God who changes not chose one ethnicity and said, "You're my people." No other ethnicity. In fact, we can commit mass genocide against other ethnicities. Oh, when I give up on humans, but save the only good one and that family. Somehow this is the omnipresent, potent God doesn't think, oh, but obviously like they're going to reproduce and human nature is this thing that I created, and so it's literally not going to solve the problem. But then with the bringing in of the new law, there's never and now by the way, genocide not okay. Oh, okay, so like we have a new law, still doesn't say genocide.
Well, that's the big
or racism.
Like my criticisms of the Bible are ones that apply to the entire Bible, not just the Old Testament. The New Testament never condemns genocide or slavery. It doesn't reverse those positions whatsoever. I realize that theologically, the Old Testament law, like the cleanliness law, is not binding on Christians. It's a core part of theology. It's a big problem. Atheists tend to make bad arguments regarding that, saying you're inconsistent if you're eating a lobster while you're condemning homosexuals. And I don't think that's an inconsistency if you understand their theology.
Yeah.
Because there's this whole section in Acts where Peter has a vision where God explicitly tells him you can eat anything you want, and the laws of cleanliness from the Old Testament don't apply to you.
Kyle Kalinske, if this ever gets back to you, we were just watching one of your secular talk things from like 5 years ago before you were talking more about politics. You would bash on religion. And the thing is like, if you don't understand the basics of the kind of theology of the people you're critiquing, then here you are pulling the shellfish argument. And it's like,
the thing is, you don't need a ton of information to discuss and debate with religious apologists. You just need to stay in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, the easiest way to debate any religion is the burden of proof. You're like, okay, you have claims. How do you justify it? And they're going to come with arguments. And it's like, you either, how do you justify that? Or here's the problem with that. It's usually pretty trivial to do. And it's like, well, you wouldn't think that logic applies in this other field, right? It comes back to consistency. And so that's easy. I was going to keep talking about we have really good discussions, and there's always all these rabbit trails, and I want to put a pin in it and go back to.
I'm usually pretty good at bookmarking like the essentials. But we do have to close this out relatively soon. And well, did I throw you off when I brought up Kyle Kalinske, or did you want to say something about Kyle? Because
I like Kyle.
No, yeah,
he's awesome. He's probably my favorite YouTuber. I watch all his videos, and he's on point when it comes to politics, and his rhetorical framing of stuff I think is fantastic. The facts that he uses, the fact that he's kind of repetitive with a lot of his best points, and that's a good thing. It kind of helps people remember it, and when these are powerful points, it helps you be more effective in your own rhetoric. You remember this kind of stuff. But he is best in his wheelhouse, which is politics.
And healthcare.
His first few years of videos were both basically religious and creationist and young earth and all this kind of stuff and low-hanging fundamentalist fruit. And I mean, I still find it entertaining, but it wasn't very deep and it wasn't the best. So sorry, Kyle. Huge fan. Don't like your stuff.
Yeah, no, Kyle, just bring Steve on for a consultation on the basic best arguments.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of the most important arguments I always try to get to with religious apologetics is, why should I consider the Bible important or authoritative? And first you have to find out what their position on the Bible is, because everybody is different. Some people think it's the inerrant divine word of God, and other people think that it was a book written by men, but there are truths in there about Christianity that kind of found the religion. It's kind of the more moderate approach. And you don't want to assume one is the other, so I try to, what's your position? But I don't think you can defend Christianity's core claims without first believing that the Bible is in a special way authoritative. Because any book can make 99 claims, it doesn't make the 100th claim true.
Right.
So if you treat it like any other book and you go, well, it's right about this historical fact. It said Jerusalem exists. What do you know? Jerusalem exists. Well, what do you know? They were writing in their own time and place, so they knew.
Is that said? Do people say that?
Not Jerusalem, but there'll be like some like little town.
They said they were here. We have evidence to believe they were.
Right. And it's like, duh, they were, and nobody's arguing they weren't writing back then. So of course they knew about their own time and place.
Yeah.
If I claim that I was abducted by aliens, but I also say in the same book that Barack Obama was president during this period, that doesn't make my claim true.
Yeah, they're like cheeseburgers.
So, anyway.
Doesn't make cheeseburgers bad. Yeah.
The core part of the whole thing is the Bible true? And is it especially authoritative? Is it the word of God?
Yeah.
And that's difficult to defend. They really can't. My favorite argument personally, when I was a Christian, and now it's still valuable to me, because I think it is actually, it's the rare argument with apologists where if you granted its premises, the conclusion would actually both be true and relevant. It would actually be a good argument. Most of their arguments are so bad they don't even apply at that level.
Okay.
But
so what is it?
It's the argument from prophecy.
Okay.
So if the Bible, I used to think my best evidence for Christianity was the Bible itself, which isn't, it's not circular reasoning. I'm not saying it because it says it's true. I'm saying because the Bible has this prophecy that shows divine knowledge from outside the time-space continuum. And if that was true, it might not necessarily prove God. Matt Dillahunty would confront that point, which is true, but it would certainly be like noteworthy, right?
This is some Chuck Missler shit. Cause like
totally. Chuck, I was huge Chuck Missler. He was like, he would talk about how there's hundreds of prophecies and they're all true, and the chances of that happening are so small that if you took all the molecules in the universe and picked out one, that would be the chance of this all being happening by random chance.
This guy was like, the whole Bible is a code, and you can crack the code, and we got the numbers for cracking the code.
Yeah, but
it was basically like measuring brain skulls, but in a Bible. So.
Well, yeah, and the way to confront the prophecy thing is, again, what I said about logical consistency. It's like, okay, let's talk about prophecy, but first we need a standard of evidence that you are willing to apply consistently. So if you claim this is prophecy, and it's kind of vague, well, you can't then say Nostradamus isn't a prophet because he was kind of vague.
Right.
You have to apply your reasoning consistently.
Totally.
You also can't write a book. I can't write a book in 2019 and say that I predicted 9/11 in 1996, but I'm writing the book in 2019. That's not, you wouldn't buy that. So if there's good evidence that a certain book was written after the events prophesied, you can't reasonably consistently argue that point.
Right.
So my first thing is consistent prophecy criteria questions. So there's 8 I've collected. If the original prophecy was written down after the claimed fulfillment, can that be considered evidence of prophecy? Can we rule it out? Then it's the second one is it vague? The third one is can it be considered evidence if it wasn't considered a prophecy in advance of the fulfillment? So the thing is, you can have a ton of points, having passing resemblance to future events, and you're going to eventually find those similarities. If I look at all of Shakespeare's events, all of Shakespeare's writing, I can think some of them foretell certain events in the future because they have a resemblance. But if I didn't think it was a prophecy before it came to be, then should it count? That's a reasonable question. Can we consider it evidence if the prophecy could have been self-fulfilled by somebody with direct knowledge and there was motivation to do so? So the obvious example of this is Jesus entering the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So I believe it was Daniel gave a specific time frame for when the Messiah was going to return, and you can calculate it out in so many years. And Jesus triumphantly strolled into Jerusalem on a donkey, which was part of the prophecy, at that exact time. Well, if you're claiming you're the Messiah and your people study this book religiously, you don't think they knew about the prophecy?
Yeah. If
he happened to be the most noteworthy Messiah claimant at that particular time, then of course he would.
Right. Yeah, I always thought it would be like,
anyway, there's a couple more.
In the end times, the lion will lay down with the lamb. It's like, well, I can actually manufacture that pretty easily. I can go get a baby lamb. I can go get a baby lion, raise them together. They'll fucking love each other. Oh, we're in the end times. Or in the end times, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. And, well, I guess there's always been wars and rumors of wars. That's why there's states.
Christians
So-
have always believed that. Kyle was just mentioning some statistics about how like 25%, I believe it was, or maybe it was one of his older videos, but like 25% of Americans thought that Jesus was coming back in the next 2 years, and 50% of Americans thought within the next 50 years.
Oh my God. So one of the things
They've been
I was
saying
just
that
doing
for 2,000 years.
I was
by
just
the way.
dunking on a dumb argument, and a lot of the what we just did was unpacking some stuff that would help someone who's perhaps leaving as fundamentalist a background as what we come from. But now let's like take a quick pivot and just you can straw man a position without lying. You can straw man a position by responding to the actual dumbest people representing that position. So, or people who maybe like when they represent that position, they use a lot of bad arguments, but the fallacy shows us that doesn't mean that they're wrong just because they're bad at arguing for their position.
Right.
So what if you were to steel man Christianity in your best way, as far as like people you've confronted, whether through reading or arguing online or in real life, or just in your own imagination, what's the best steel man of Christianity that you've got? And obviously you probably have to define your term in this case.
That's difficult.
And steel manning, for people who don't know, is instead of making it into a dumb argument so you can beat it easily, it's making it into the strongest opponent you possibly can, which is good for a lot of reasons if you're not preaching to a choir only, because it shows people that you care about actually reaching them and respecting where they're coming from.
It.
Yeah. And you might understand it better than they do.
It from both sides. So I've been in this field and discussing with people for so long. I haven't heard a new argument in years and years and years, and they all are bad in multiple ways. So it's kind of tough to steel man. Now, I will say there are when I say that, it's basically the evangelical, more fundamentalist Christians, and people will say, well, that's not all Christians. And I will say, you're right. But it is the majority of U.S. Christians, and it's the most powerful demographic on the planet because they're the most powerful demographic in the most powerful country in the world. So evangelical Christians kind of rule the world right now, and it kind of matters. So yeah, and that's a frame of reference that needs to be dealt with. Now, the most intellectually respectable branch of Christianity, if I was to kind of be like, if I was to be a Christian, it would be the universalist Christians. So they're not, and the reason I say that is because they're not overtly falsified. Now, they're still not falsifiable, which means it's still not an intellectually valid point of view, but at least it's not falsified. And I say that because I think the core problem with most Christianity, like the most, and I've already discussed the Bible and its importance, but even probably more fundamentally is the claim of salvation. Like that is a core absurdity that needs to be dealt with.
Oh my God.
So the belief that an ultimate creator God of truth, because it created all of reality, and it has perfect knowledge of all of reality, we can assume, would make its one and only method by which it judges the eternal afterlife, whether I'm gullible enough to believe an individual unsubstantiated set of claims out of thousands of competing unsubstantiated claims. There's a lot of religions. And if I don't believe the right set of human claims that are not justified, I'm going to burn in hell forever. That is the foundational absurdity that just completely invalidates most sects of Christianity. So universalists are not falsified by that because they believe that Jesus died on the cross for everybody, and therefore he saved the whole world, whether you believe in him or not. So they're much less about like evangelizing and just more about social aspects and the morality and, cool.
I want to cue a sound effect, and it's Eleanor Shellstrop from The Good Place in the first episode or two, because we were watching this yesterday because Steve's not seen the show sequentially. And she's like, this system is bullshit. I deserve to be in the middle place.
Right.
I'm a middle person. People like me should spend the afterlife in Cincinnati.
the whole idea of an eternal afterlife that's judged by beliefs of whether you believe human claims or not is the issue. And this is an important rhetorical point, because Christians are always accusing us of rejecting God. And my response is, wait a second, I thought you were a human, because I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to God. You made a set of claims to me. I don't know that you speak for God. How do I know that you speak for God?
Probably something that made us more skeptical at some point was that our mom's best friend, who was this tyrannical, mean person. In my memory of her, God bless her soul now, I'm sure she's great, but in my memory, she was really mean, and she would justify everything she did by God told her.
It's basically a meme of evangelical Christianity, because one of the big problems with it is the belief in the Holy Spirit. So you believe that you have this mental entity that's talking to you.
Yeah, so your read of the Bible is right because God told you so. Right. It's like, well, everybody.
Like, how do you argue with somebody who's like, God told me? And so if you disagreed with this person as a Christian and they're saying God told you them, it's just like, okay. So it's kind of like an easy win for her because nobody would argue with her, but it didn't change anybody's mind because they're like, yeah, no. And it was a lot of things. It came up a lot. It was like a meme. God told me this. God told me that.
I would say my best steel man of Christianity is going to be like death of God theology Christianity, in the tradition of, I can't even remember the main thinker off the top of my head because it's escaping me, but Pete Rollins is more of a popularizer of it. Pete Rollins will be leading a conversation or a book discussion group this summer on Slavoj Žižek's Sublime Objective Ideology. So obviously he's a fan of an atheist communist, so you know he's not a regular Christian. And he's got some really interesting takes, and there's a debate between him and Lawrence Krauss, where Lawrence Krauss is just so out of his element because he's speaking to a Lacanian Marxist. He doesn't know what's up from down. He's never talked to someone like that before. And for Rollins, it kind of comes down to some basic psychological phenomena that he thinks there is some equipment, conceptual equipment in Christianity that still has a lot of power. But it's a cultural Christianity. It's a death of God Christianity. So
I was gonna say
it's its own thing. But
so trigger warning. Close your ears. One of the better steelmans of Christianity is Jordan Peterson.
So, I actually know I would have said that because it is a cultural Christianity. And it's actually funny to watch.
I've seen a lot of breakdowns
yeah.
of people, like I think Rationality posted it. But
don't bring them up right now.
Sorry, but
we'll be here another hour.
A few skeptics who have
trans lives matter, trans rights matter,
yes,
trans people in sports matter. I'll also say Black Lives Matter just while we're at it.
Sure,
let's go back. Yeah, but let's go back. Okay.
So
we said rationality rule. I'm sure. Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
But no, several people have done an expose of like what are Jordan Peterson's actual beliefs, and he refuses to be pinned down into literal examples. Like he refuses to say that Jesus literally rose out of the grave. To him, it's all metaphors, and it's useful culturally and socially and emotionally, and it's a metaphor. And he sounds like a Christian, and Christians think he's on their side, and he's all about monetizing that social capital. So he's glad to perpetuate that. But when you try to pin him down to it, and he's in a discussion with some reasonable people, he's not going to commit to it because he also considers himself an academic, and he doesn't want to expose himself as irrational.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts.
But there is a lot of benefits. I can appreciate, talking about a steel man, I can appreciate the idea of metaphors for their like pure use,
right?
Their pure value,
right?
Like if you want to talk about how what's the word? But if the value of repentance and changing your heart and being truly apologetic, and the idea that's you can have that washed away so you don't have to have this guilt weighing over your shoulder, so you can imagine this metaphor that somebody else takes the guilt. Maybe that's beneficial to some people. I think it's kind of
it was very damaging for me.
I think it can be extremely damaging, and that's the problem with metaphors that aren't based on truth, is they can't, if you believe them literally, they become damaging on their own.
Yeah, because it kind of skewed my moral compass because I was trained to believe that all sins are equal in God's eyes, which then just kind of makes it like a matter of opinion if you value this one more than that one. And then because you can't not fuck up, and therefore like bigger fuck ups, well, you just washed away, it won't matter, right? And I think there's a lot of bad things that come from that.
Well, I remember
the thing I want to say about Jordan Peterson, I have to do this because I've been sitting on it, is that on the one hand, you have the alt-right critique of Peterson coming from people like Vox Day. So like just look up VOX Day. He doesn't get a lot of attention from like left tubers who are critiquing the alt-right. Even though he's like the one who's like, he's pretty big. He knows all the people like the bigger names like Milo and those folks. But he's more of like, you know, bookish and philosophical and super Christian, and he hates Jordan Peterson because Jordan Peterson draws some people who would be alt-right into more of like this, well, I don't have to be Christian. And he's like, this is heresy. And I'm just like, yeah, right. So it's fun. And that is kind of what, you know, he does get, Peterson does get harassment from those type of alt-righters. So he's not completely lying when he says that they don't like him. The thing is, he doesn't realize how much he plays into them, but we can set that aside. Because Dorian Sapiens said that when I was describing Pete Rollins' position, that sounds kind of like Peterson's position. I just want to say that the fundamental difference between their two positions, besides the Marxism, obviously, is that which really for Rollins means a critique of commodity fetishization and consumerism and stuff like that, is for Peterson, religion is important so that people can find meaning and purpose, and so that it can hold culture and society together. And that's his unionism. For Peterson, it's exact opposite, because if he's a Lacanian. So like they're both subscribing to a type of psychoanalysis, but the Zizek-Rollins version of psychoanalysis is anti-purpose, anti-meaning. It says that we're trying to get past ideology, and that people grab a hold of these things and delude themselves, and that a death of God take on Christianity is that you are embracing being anti society in a certain sense, and because you believe in utopian visions of how humans ought to act towards one another that are anti-state, anti-capitalism, and you believe that that part of the human that needs to find meaning, that feels a sort of emptiness that always needs to be filled by consumerism under capitalism, Christianity and God just become idols that fill that void for Peter Rollins. You have to kill the idol of God and kill the idol of trying to fill that void, and embrace the fact that there's that fundamental suffering. And only through embracing that fundamental suffering are we able to actually experience empathy, because everyone has that, and everyone's filling that with different things. And a lot of the tribalism, as we were talking about, that comes from how you fill that void. If you only fill that void and identify, if you build your ego around what you fill that void with, let's just say it's NASCAR or it's, you know, collecting stamps or something. If that's, then you're only going to really hang out with other people who fill the void the same way. So Rollins is for a kind of Christianity that's about dashing those things to pieces and putting yourself into a zone of doubt and unknowing. It completely fucked up Lawrence Krauss, as you can imagine. So that's the difference there, kids. Oh, the other thing that I would say is that the talk that Peter Rollins gave in response to Jordan Peterson, kind of on the premise of what is the difference between Zizek and the Lacanian psychoanalytic position and the Jungian Peterson position, that he gave at JPCon, which was the conference that I organized last year, is on the New Civilization Project YouTube channel. So you can watch that, and he goes into it, and it's a great video. That's like 8,000 views.
Awesome. I was going to say, I saw a comment. I don't remember who it was at this point.
Do you know Ben?
Somebody was asking about Ben Burgess Logic series, and no, I'm not familiar with it.
River Ransom was the one we asked, and I met Ben at JPCon, and he's got a really fantastic series through Zero Books on give the right an argument, and he's all about logic because he's a logic professor, and he equips people with a lot of basic conceptual tools that you're probably already familiar with, but for socialism.
Right.
Yeah,
it's
great.
Again, that's not a label I wouldn't go around calling myself socialist. I would say that I want to live in a society that maximizes well-being. I think that should be the core principle from behind the veil of ignorance.
Right.
And based on that, make a really good argument that we need Medicare for all and universal higher education because we want equal opportunity. I mean, that's supposed to be part of the conservative platform too, is equal opportunity. But
and then you can make separate arguments.
Get into higher education, you don't have an equal opportunity.
Exactly.
And all these there's a bunch of more things we were talking about that should be socialized, even if everything isn't. And so you get into that discussion, but you don't start with the label in how I deal with things.
Absolutely.
And it gets complicated because obviously there's a lot of different types of people who call themselves socialists, and I don't want to give people the wrong idea.
Well, I mean, that's why, people like, I don't know. A lot of the people who I like to follow, well, even if they identify as leftists, don't want to be pinned down. I keep calling myself breadtube adjacent just because people have their little like gatekeeping qualifiers for what counts. And I'm like, I don't want to have to pass your test. I'm doing philosophy and critical theory. The whole point of critical theory is non-dogmatic pursuit of the Marxian project, which isn't Stalinism, isn't Leninism, isn't any ism. It's an approach to things philosophically, really.
I love the name "Being Cool is for Nerds."
I always love that name.
I was just discussing earlier about how nerds are the new cool people. I've been trying to get back into Marvel because I've never read comics, but now I'm not one of the cool kids because I don't know about comics. So it's coming full circle. So
you're getting
now I'm reading Marvel comics. Just I'm embracing my inner nerd and trying to learn a thing or two.
I'd like to think that. Oh, actually, I know I would have read a ton of comics if I'd had access to them. But I didn't have access to comics.
But they were evil because there's magic and stuff, and they're satanic, and they probably like give strongholds in your heart to the devil and stuff like that. So
true. I got my friend to burn his Harry Potter books when I was 12 years old because I convinced him they were evil. So
is that the same one I did a money trick for, and he thought it was real?
That's the other one. Okay. That's the one I'm still friends with. The other one has just disappeared from my life because grew up and went away.
It happens.
Yeah, it does. All right, y'all. Being Cool for Nerds says any system is capable of maximizing well-being for people, but the incentive structures of socialism seem to be the ones that idealistically have the most weight for you.
Right.
For me, for you.
No, the incentive structures of any system you set up is certainly the most important thing, because if you're going toward a specific goal, you need to analyze how to get there and the incentive structures. And we talk about this a lot. I've been in management for a while, and businesses are always talking about it. Like, you want to make sure your pay plan is incentivizing the kind of behavior that you want. And it's the same type of thing that should be done at the society level. So, if we want to not burn up our planet in the next 50 years, we should probably have an incentive structure that kind of supports that.
Right.
But right now, like, the profit motive for this quarter rules the world. Like, that motive is all that matters. If you're a CEO and that's not your only concern, you will be replaced by somebody who it is.
Yeah, and sometimes that's by law. Like, it's whack.
So you don't care about the working conditions of the people in the third world that are making your product. You don't care about the environmental impact. You don't care about integrity. I mean, it's all about what politicians can I buy off at what cost to improve my bottom line by this amount.
Well, we have a whole new generation of wannabe activist shareholders who basically through business school are brainwashed to believe that they're going to be the number one change. It's not all wrong. They can make big changes. And an example of that is like activist shareholders bought up the largest shares of Idaho Power from the Netherlands. And that's why Idaho Power is shutting down all of its coal plants and moving in a better direction. But you know, I don't want to ever say that those people or agendas are useless. You know, we need all
it's a
hands
smart
on
use
deck.
of money.
But
Totally.
But at the same time, you've got a lot of people thinking they can save the world by prioritizing profit because they've been taught trickle down.
Right.
Theory.
So my thought, you know, socialism is great and all. It's going to take in a real world at the minimum decades for it to actually become a reality in the United States. We can chip around the edges. We have a chance, our best chance since FDR, to have universal health care, because Bernie is considered by many people to be the front runner. And if he can win and bring enough of a progressive wave with him, we have a real chance to get something like that. But like full on socialism, well, not so much. So our best chance of seizing the means of production is by seizing the means of production. You know, there's different ways of doing that on an individual level without doing it on the legislative level. So, you know, buying shares is one way. Another way is starting businesses that are economically successful on their own merits and that are employee owned and stuff like that.
Yeah, which Richard Wolff is a huge advocate for. And then we have to have a serious conversation about how we don't then, as collectivized workers within an a corporation or whatever, screw ourselves over still in the process of competing with other people, you know, making ourselves work longer, making ourselves get paid less, because that's another kind of tyranny that Wolff never gets into, but I think he's just trying to diffuse the scary associations with the word. That's why he focuses on co-ops.
It's incredibly important. It's probably the most important moment in history to seize the means of production, because if we don't, the means of production are about to put us all out of a job. And that's the thing about AI.
Mm-hmm.
If we have employee-owned AI, the standard of living is going to be awesome. Work hours will be less. It'll be like a utopia world. But if only the oligarchs have AI and automation and technology, then they're going to live on their own fucking island or planet and fuck the rest of us. So kind of important to seize those means of production right now.
Yeah. That's actually probably a good place to leave it off. We could talk about those. There's so many things I'd like to go into. This has been really fun. So
I always like talking with you.
Yeah.
You need to like move in or something.
I'm moving around and in California right now, and I'll be here for another day. It's cool.
And coming back, hopefully.
It's been great, yeah, and be back soon. And I look forward to doing more conversations like this. So being cool is for nerds said when they were a fundamentalist, they convinced a girlfriend to break her Twilight DVDs. Oh my gosh. Fundamentalism is so horrible. And then being cool for nerds was basically being like, yes, preach it, because we were getting into all the major points. And I just,
and
I feel like
to beat the extremely effective propaganda coming from the right when it comes to socialist opinion. And I think this is something I've noticed with like all conservatives, top down, like the top figureheads and thought leaders, here's any thought, are not any more deep about it than anybody else, but they all have this, all they do is argue against the label of socialism. So if you like just avoid that and get there eventually, but you're like, so I've had several right-wing people that agree with me that they want universal healthcare and they want this and they want that. And yeah, that makes sense and that makes sense. And I'm like, you just agreed with the entire progressive agenda. Are you really still a Republican? Like, what do you disagree with? What is keeping you a Republican right now? And
I just don't like kale and I want to keep my gun.
It's a tribal identity. And yeah, we got to, I think through discussion and building a sense of common, like when people agree with you. I was thinking another right winger, I was talking about the Green New Deal and how it outlaws cows and airplanes, which of course isn't in there. So I challenged him to read it and he actually read it. And then he was like, wow, I agreed with 85% of that. Wow. Like a right winger. And he agreed with most of the Green New Deal. Because if you actually read it, it's like, wow, that's good stuff. And it benefits everybody. And we would rather spend our money on that than being the global police in some other country. Right? That makes more sense. Like most people agree with that. It's actually the mainstream opinion. It's just not treated like it.
Yeah.
So if we get away from trying to defend a label, which is a much more difficult game and just talk about the concepts, they don't have anything. There's no deepness to their positions.
Yeah.
Like Destiny says, conservatives, whether they're at the top of the game or the bottom, they're always one question away from collapse.
Wow.
Because they're not that deep. They're really not. So, and I challenge anybody to say otherwise. So if you're conservative, look me up. Especially if you're a libertarian. Taxation is theft. Oh, I want to talk to you.
Being cool is for nerds. Send me an email. It's in the about on the channel. And everybody else, it's been so cool hanging out. I hope if you came in late that you'll be able to catch up later. I usually unlist live streams after a few days, and then they're only available to patrons from the $1 tier on up. Not really making a plug. Yes, I am. But the my main point is just get the link now, and then when it gets unlisted, the link will still work if you want to watch it later. But it'll be up for a few days, and this will go up on the podcast, even though this will be probably the worst quality podcast that I've put up. Well, maybe, and it will definitely have a lot of dogs scratching and barking in the background because, dang, they really wanted to join us. But look how precious.
And late visitors.
The biggest problem with being a podcast listener is that you can't see how cute the puppies are.
Oh my gosh.
Or Steve. Or me. Okay. Well, all right, everybody. Wait, actually.
There's not much on the planet that can actually compete with a puppy when it comes to cuteness.
Bye-bye.
It's objectively cute that they're true that they are cuter than humans. So.
And yes. All right, everyone. Take care. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.